a memory of the retreating ice age, flowing sedately along its course for 25,000 years. This is the story of the people who have lived along the river. This is the story of the South Shore.
What's the matter, Cindy? I have to write a speech for school about Windsor. What can you say about Windsor? I don't know where to start.
Well, you could tell them about the Indians. They were here first.
The Huron tribe lived in this area for many years. They are peaceful and live by fishing and agriculture.
But often they are attacked by the Iroquois from New York State. Sometimes evidence of those battles, like this arrowhead, is dug up when new buildings are being constructed.
Then came the white man. La Salle sailed up the Detroit River in his ship, the Griffin, on his way to Lake Huron. Later, in 1701, Cadillac established Fort Pontchartrain on the site of Detroit as a fur trading post. French fur traders and retired soldiers who settled in the area needed the river for transportation and the protection of the fort. Since river frontage was limited, long, narrow farms were carved out, running back as far as the present location of Tecumseh Road. L'Assomption Church was established at Sandwich as a mission for the Indians, but soon served the settlers as well. In the last half of the 18th century, Detroit changed hands twice. In 1760, the British captured it from the French, and then in 1786, after the American Revolution, they handed it over to the United States. On both occasions, the population of the South Shore increased as settlers fled from the other side.
In the War of 1812, General Hall crossed the south bank of the river and forced the British to retreat to Sandwich.
But not for long. General Brock, with the aid of Chief Tecumseh, marched from Niagara Falls, forced Hall back into Detroit, and then captured the fort.
Meanwhile, log roads were being constructed through the wilderness. In 1809, Colonel Talbot built a road that stretched from Fort Erie to the Detroit River. This is still called the Talbot Road, or more properly, Number 3 Highway.
The early travelers along these roads found the South Shore a convenient stopping place to recover from the hardships of the journey. Several hotels were opened and ferries operated across the river.
Commerce moved slowly in British North America. There was little currency in circulation, and barter was the main avenue of trade. In 1821, the Bank of Upper Canada was established, and this was followed by the Bank of Montreal. Both these banks and the other independent provinces coined their own money.
In the early part of the 19th century, the steamship began to appear on the Great Lakes, and by 1830 the steam ferry Argo was in service across the Detroit River.
The improved commerce helped the South Shore. The first bank branch opened in 1835 and the first post office in 1841. By 1850, the community consisted of a distillery, 2 mills, 2 hotels, and a blacksmith shop. The nearest church was in Sandwich, 2 miles away.
In those days, nearly all food was homegrown. They had corn and wheat,
Apples and potatoes,
and oh yeah, fishing and hunting.
and they had to wear homemade clothes made of wool or leather. Even calico was expensive because of the cost of transportation.
But the railroad was on the way. Construction in British North America had begun in 1849, and the Great Western crossed the Niagara Peninsula to the Detroit River in 1854. And with it came instant communication, the telegraph.
That was the year that Windsor became a village. Then, 4 years later, a town. Its mayor was Colonel MacDonald.
And in 1856, Windsor got its first church, St. Alphonsus, at Goya and Park Street.
In the 1850s, the South Shore became the goal of many Negro people fleeing from slavery in the United States. They crossed the river to freedom, and many settled on farms in the county and became some of its finest citizens.
In 1858, Hiram Walker started what is probably Windsor's most famous industry.
The Walkers' interest in the area extended far beyond the distillery. Within a few years, they established a flour and grist mill, a livestock enterprise, tobacco farms, a railway across the county, and built a large hotel on Lake Erie. They encouraged a shipyard, a machine shop, a lumber yard, and a ferry service, and founded the town of Walkerville, which they subsidized in many ways.
Then came the American Civil War. The British troops were again stationed in Windsor to repel a possible invasion.
Some were even housed in the original Assumption College buildings.
There were few store-bought toys in those days. Children fortunate enough to have leisure time after schoolwork and the many chores had to find amusement in puzzles and toys and games made from simple materials with the help of parents or the local woodworker.
Windsor's water supply was a matter of backing a wagon with a water tank on it into the river, letting it fill up, then delivering it door to door.
The more prosperous families had their own wells. The town pump was established in 1857, but the regular waterworks had to wait until 1873.
There wasn't much fire protection. The town depended on the bucket brigade until a very serious fire occurred in 1867. On that occasion, the Detroit Fire Department sent men and equipment to assist and started a tradition of cooperation that is still continuing. After this fire, a pumper and a ladder truck were purchased, but another disastrous fire in 1871 leveled over 100 buildings.
One of the household chores was to clean the chimney of the lamp, trim the wick, and refill the bowl of kerosene.
Gas lighting began to appear in 1877 in street lighting and in homes and businesses.
In 1866, the railway ferry Great Western was launched at the Jenkins shipyard in Walkerville. Since it was made of iron, there was much speculation among the local residents over whether it would float. But it did, so successfully that it was in use for over 100 years.
Life on the South Shore was becoming more leisurely. Rowing clubs were formed at Windsor and Walkerville and held races on the river.
And an amateur dramatic club was formed.
Education was not neglected. St. Mary's Academy was established in 1864, first on Goyo Street, and the following year at Walletton Park. When this land was later required for the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary built a new school in South Windsor, which served the young ladies of the community until 1971. Assumption College, first opened in 1857, has met the challenge of the times and matured into the present University of Windsor.
Roads were mainly of clay with board sidewalks, although by 1870, Howard Avenue was surfaced with crushed stone.
And the horse-drawn streetcar appeared in 1874 on a road that is now University Avenue.
The steamship played an important part in the recreational activities of South Shore residents. An economical way to get away from it all was to ride the ferry back and forth across the river. You could do it as long as you wanted, for one fare, as long as you didn't get off the boat. For the more well-to-do, there were excursions from Detroit to Kingsville, return, for $1, or you could take a sedate cruise along the lake and up the Thames River to Chatham for 50 cents.
Hey, there's a telephone. Now this is really living.
The first Windsor telephone exchange was installed in 1880 and had 20 subscribers. After a few months, the original company sold out to Bell Telephone, who installed two-piece magnetophones. These were more popular than the original one-piece instrument, with which you could either talk or listen, but could not do both at the same time. This feature rather discouraged its use, except, of course, when two girls were talking, and then it didn't seem to make much difference.
And then, a first. The first electric streetcar in North America ran between Windsor and Walkerville in 1886.
J.W. Tringham of the telephone company built the generator, and the streetcar was a success technically, but a failure financially. Business was not as good as expected, and the line soon reverted to horses.
But electricity was here to stay, and now electric streetlights were being installed at main intersections.
Now came some good fortune for Windsor and a severe blow for Amherstburg. The Canadian Southern Railway was taken over by the Michigan Central and rerouted to the Detroit River at Windsor. The railway ferry at Amherstburg was discontinued.
And Windsor got its first hospital when Hotel Dieu was opened in 1889.
In this period, with the improved roads, the bicycle became popular, not only as a means of transportation, but for recreation and sport as well. Bicycle clubs were formed and races were held in which young men from many communities competed for quite valuable prizes. It could be an expensive sport, for a good racing bicycle would represent an investment of 3 months' pay for the average working man. Young ladies, too, were avid cyclists, and a newspaper of the day tells of 3 girls from Walkerville being fined for riding bicycles on the sidewalk.
However, if she did not wish to go cycling, the young lady could sit in the parlor and look at stereopticon pictures.
Or go to the town hall and see a magic lantern slideshow.
Or borrow a book from the new free library.
Or she could go for a carriage ride.
Or have her portraits taken by the new photographer on Alette Avenue.
By 1900, women cyclists and horses were scurrying for safety as the main streets and rutted back roads echoed to a new sound. A sound that was to change the South Shore from an agricultural to an industrial way of life. As the first courageous motorists appeared, legislative action was taken to protect life and property. The 10-mile-per-hour speed limit was rigidly enforced by the long arm of the law, usually mounted on a bicycle. Since Windsor was close to Detroit, it soon became an assembly plant for automobiles intended both for Canada and for export. In 1904, the Walkerville Wagon Company became the nucleus of the Ford Motor Company of Canada. And in 1908, the famous Model T would start to pour forth by the thousands to put Canada on wheels.
If the young lady of 1910 didn't feel up to taking a ride in a horse's carriage, she could wind up her phonograph and listen to her favorite singer.
Or go to a party.
Or ride on a trolley.
Or pose for her picture in the backyard.
The South Shore girls of that era were as beautiful, well-dressed, and graceful as they are now. It's just that they had to remember not to take a deep breath. Then, on August 14th, 1914, this easy, carefree period ended forever. Windsor's part in the First World War consisted mainly of training soldiers. They were billeted at the Jockey Club at what is now Jackson Park, and a tent city extended as far north as Shepherd Avenue, where Willette Avenue ended. Windsor woke early on June 21st, 1915, when a loud explosion shattered the Peabody Overall Factory as German sympathizers attempted to halt production of uniforms for the armed forces. The joy and enthusiasm that welcomed the end of the war in November 1918 was soon subdued by the outbreak of a severe influenza epidemic that spread across the world. Many deaths were recorded in Essex County before the crisis passed at the beginning of the new year.
And the Windsor Star was started in 1918.
And across the river, the Detroit News started its first radio broadcast, and soon everyone was listening with headphones on their homemade crystal sets.
And Windsor was growing again. The swamp at Giles and Jeanette had been drained, houses were built, and the city moved southward with the general prosperity.
And new schools were constructed for the larger population.
An American experiment in morality by legislation resulted in a disreputable but exciting industry springing up along the South Shore. Over a 10-year period, thoughtful Canadians helped to quench the thirst of their American friends by acting as a source of supply for the rum runners. Boats and even airplanes were used to get the precious commodity into the States, and newspaper records even tell of the young lady who was arrested while trying to smuggle 2 gallons of whiskey across the border in a tin bustle.
What's a bustle, Cindy?
Well, I don't know. That was before my time.
By the end of the 1920s, the old ferry boats could no longer cope, and on Sunday evenings the cars waiting to cross the river were lined up for blocks.
So, in 1929, at a cost of 2 years' work and $21 million, the Ambassador Bridge was opened.
The Detroit-Windsor Tunnel was also built at that time.
At the Walker Airport in the mid-30s, a number of young South Shore residents were learning to fly in this Canadian-made wood and canvas Gypsy Moth, while their friends and family shook their heads in despair. And money was hard to come by in those days, too.
And everybody was talking about the Dion quintuplets.
And people started finding jobs again.
And buying things.
And Windsor was growing.
And then it was the summer of 1939. Thousands of people turned out to welcome King George and Queen Elizabeth on their visit to Windsor. It was a summer of nostalgia. The streetcars had made their final run to a serenade of car horns. People were taking last rides on the ferry boats, or spending the evening seeing a movie at the new Skyway Drive-In Theater. Some took the steamer to Boblo Island and danced to a popular tune called Happy Days Are Here Again. In those early days of September, things along the South Shore were really looking... Things went pretty much as usual in Windsor during the early days of the war. Oh, the young man across the street who had been spending his money on flying lessons was gone, and the trained reservists of the Essex Scottish. And of course you needed ration coupons to buy gasoline for the family car. It wasn't long before the old Walker Airport had been enlarged and was the base of the No. 7 Elementary Flying Training School for student pilots from all over the Commonwealth. But mostly, Windsor could only work and pray and listen to the latest news reports on the radio.
This is London calling. Here is the news. Bomber Command has reported that in operations carried out last night, 795 of our aircraft made an intensive attack against the German city of Nuremberg. Damage appears to have been heavy, and many large fires are reported to be burning. 94 of our aircraft failed to return.
When the war ended, Windsor's fighting men came home and tried to take up where they had left off. They found themselves enjoying many remarkable wartime developments.
High taxes.
And radar traps.
And jet propulsion.
And long-playing records.
And wire recording.
And hey, look, it's television.
Windsor was one of the first Canadian cities to receive television programs. First from WWJ, Channel 4 in Detroit. They were soon followed by Channels 2 and 7 in Detroit, and then a new structure appeared on the Windsor skyline, and the South Shore had its own Channel 9. Just one of the many cultural activities in which South Shore residents have participated over the years is the Windsor Light Opera Association, which for nearly a quarter century has presented fine musical theater. And suddenly, it is the present. This, then, is Windsor. Why does a small riverbank community grow to form one of Canada's major cities? Accidents of geography and history? Yes. Industrial facilities? Yes. But the most important factor is people. Ambitious people. Good people. People who are interested in themselves and in their families, but also in their community. The people who have. The people who are. The people who will. The people who have made their home on the South Shore.
Well, Cindy, what are you going to put in your speech?
I don't know. What can you say about Windsor?
Gee, you really have a problem.